The moment I hit the floor of our front hallway, my cheek pressed against the cold tile. I remember thinking, the grout needs cleaning. That's what my brain offered me while my husband's lawyer stood in the doorway holding a manila envelope, and my husband stood behind him. Arms crossed weren't the expression he usually saved for quarterly reports he didn't like. 38 years old, 14 years of marriage, and the most humiliating moment of my life smelled like the bergamot candle I'd lit that morning because I thought he was coming home for dinner. He wasn't coming home for dinner. She slipped, my husband said to the lawyer, not moving to help me. Sign the papers, Iris. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I looked up at him from the floor. Connor Whitfield, 6'2", salt and pepper at the temples, the kind of jaw that photographs well at galas. I had loved that jaw. I had pressed my palm against it on our wedding day in Banff and thought, this is the face I will know my whole life. The papers the lawyer was holding outlined a settlement, $240,000, the Subaru, and 30 days to vacate the house we'd built together in Oakville. $240,000. For 14 years. He didn't say her name that night. He didn't have to. I'd already found the text 3 weeks earlier. Sable, that was her name. Sable with a lowercase s in her contact info like she was a brand he was managing, and I'd sat with that knowledge alone for 21 days while I figured out what to do. I hadn't figured it out fast enough. I tried to stand. My heel caught the edge of the hall runner, the one we'd brought back from that trip to Portugal. And I went down again, and this time I heard him exhale. Not with concern, with impatience, like I was a meeting running over schedule. The firm has already approved the terms, he said. This is generous, Iris S., you know that. Generous. $240,000 for a woman who had given up a tenured research position at McMaster University to relocate to Toronto when his company expanded. A woman who had spent the last 6 years managing every social obligation, every dinner party, every charity gala that had helped him build the image that got him appointed to the board of Whitfield Capital Group. The company that bore his name but ran, in no small part, on the relationships I had cultivated. I looked at the lawyer, young. Couldn't have been more than 32. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. I'm not signing tonight, I said. Connor's expression didn't change. Iris, I said, I'm not signing tonight. I got up on my own. You can let yourself out. He left, the lawyer left. I stood in the hallway alone with the bergamot candle still burning and the hall runner slightly askew and the very specific, very quiet feeling of a life being demolished from the inside. I called my sister in Halifax that night. She answered on the second ring the way she always does, like she's been waiting. He served you. He served me. In my own house. There was a pause. I heard her walk into another room, the sound of a door closing, the particular silence of someone choosing their words carefully. Iris, she said. Do you remember what Dad used to say about the Ashford account? I did. Our father had spent 30 years as a chartered accountant in Halifax, and the Ashford account was his code for a situation where what looked like the winning position was actually the most exposed one. He'd said it first about a client who'd sold a property too early and missed the actual value underneath. He thinks he's selling at the top, I said. He has no idea what's underneath. What was underneath? 8 years earlier, when Connor's company was still a mid-sized wealth management firm hemorrhaging clients after a compliance scandal, I had introduced him to 3 families. The Leroys of Vancouver, the Okafor Bryants of Ottawa, the Sundram family out of Calgary. Old money, new money, and institutional money respectively. Combined assets under management, now exceeding $400 million. Relationships that existed because those families trusted me, because I'd grown up adjacent to them, because I'd gone to school with their children, because my father had managed their taxes for a generation. Connor had built the last decade of Whitfield Capital's success on a foundation of my social architecture, and he was offering me $240,000 for it. What he didn't know, what he had somehow never thought to ask in 14 years, was that my father hadn't just been their accountant. My father, Robert Ashford, had died when I was 31, 7 years into my marriage. He had been quiet about his finances in the way that men of his generation often were. He had driven the same '09 Camry for 12 years. He wore the same parka every winter. He ate lunch at the same diner on Barrington Street every Thursday, where they knew his order by heart. What he had not told me until a letter arrived from his estate lawyer 3 weeks after his funeral was that he had spent 40 years quietly acquiring commercial property across Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Warehouse units, storage facilities. A small industrial park outside Moncton. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that showed up at galas. At the time of his death, the portfolio was valued at just under $19 million. He left all of it to me. Connor knew about the inheritance in the abstract. He knew my father had left me some property, but I had never discussed the specifics, not out of deception, exactly. More out of a feeling I couldn't fully articulate at the time. That this was mine in a way our shared life wasn't. That I wanted to understand it before I absorbed it into us. I had understood it. Over 7 years, with the help of a property manager named Gerald who had worked with my father for 2 decades, I had quietly grown that portfolio. Reinvested the rental income. Made 2 small acquisitions in Prince Edward Island when the market was soft. Refinanced strategically when rates dropped. By the time Connor handed me divorce papers in our Oakville hallway, the portfolio was worth a little over $31 million. And it was held entirely in my name. In a numbered company incorporated in Nova Scotia before our marriage, which my family lawyer, a woman named Hartley, who had an office above a bakery in Dartmouth and zero tolerance for nonsense, had confirmed was entirely separate property under Ontario law. Connor was divorcing what he thought was a comfortable upper-middle-class woman with good manners and useful connections. He was actually divorcing the majority stakeholder in a $31 million commercial real estate portfolio, who also happened to hold the personal relationships that underwrote his $400 million in AUM. I didn't tell him any of this that night in the hallway. I let him leave. I let him think he had won. Then I called Hartley. The next 6 weeks were the most clarifying of my life. I moved out of the Oakville house. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. I wasn't going to perform the grief of the abandoned wife in the house where he'd made his plans. I rented a furnished apartment on the Danforth, 2 blocks from a good bakery and a decent used bookshop, and I felt, for the first time in years, like I could breathe at my own pace. Connor, I heard through mutual channels, was not worried about me. Why would he be? He was 3 months into a relationship with Sable, who was 29 and worked in marketing at a Bay Street firm and wore the kind of structured blazers that photograph well on LinkedIn. He had already been seen at the Soho House with her on a Tuesday. He was moving on cleanly and publicly, the way men with resources tend to do. What he was not doing was thinking carefully about the Leroy family, or the Okafor Bryants, or the Sundarams. I was. I called Helena Leroy first. We had been friendly for years. Not close in the way of people who call each other spontaneously, but close in the way of people who genuinely like each other and simply don't make enough time. She answered my call immediately, which told me she'd already heard something. "Iris," she said. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." I told her the truth. Not the wounded version, not the strategic version, just the actual sequence of events plainly. Connor had asked for a divorce. I was going to be fine. I wanted her to know before she heard a shaped version from his office. There was a pause. "He sent someone to meet with us last month," she said. "Reviewing the portfolio," he called it. It felt like an audit. "That's not a review," I said. "That's retention anxiety." Another pause. Then Helena laughed, a short, dry sound. "How are you, actually?" "I'm genuinely fine," I said. And I meant it. I just wanted you to know where things stood. I had similar conversations with the Okafor Bryants and the Sundarams over the following 2 weeks. I wasn't asking them to do anything. I wasn't making any kind of pitch. I was simply staying in relationship, the way I always had, because that's what genuine relationships require. Presence, not performance. The decisions those families made after those conversations were their own. By mid-October, Whitfield Capital had received withdrawal notices representing just under $280 million in assets under management. Not all at once, gradually, quietly, the way serious money always moves. One family cited a portfolio review. Another mentioned consolidating with their primary bank. The third gave no reason at all, which is the prerogative of people who have been in business long enough to know they don't owe one. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wasn't that cruel? And I've asked myself the same question, at 3 a.m, in that Danforth apartment with the radiator ticking and the streetlight coming through the curtains. Here's what I've come to. I didn't withdraw those relationships. I simply stopped maintaining them on his behalf. I stopped being the invisible infrastructure. And when the infrastructure became visible by its absence, what was revealed was what had always been true. That the foundation was mine. I didn't demolish the building. I just stopped holding it up. Connor, I later learned, spent several frantic weeks trying to understand what had happened. His business development director called the Leroy family twice. Both calls went to voicemail. His assistant reached out to a contact at the Okafor Bryant office and was told, politely but clearly, that the family had decided to consolidate their investments elsewhere. He didn't connect it to me. Not at first. I heard he told someone at a dinner, "Iris is handling the divorce gracefully. She's not the type to cause problems." In November, I flew to Halifax for a week. Gerald had flagged a potential acquisition. A small industrial property in Dartmouth that the owner, an older man whose children weren't interested in taking over, wanted to sell quietly without going to market. We walked the building together on a Thursday afternoon, the wind off the harbor doing what it always does in November, and I thought about my father walking similar buildings, in the same kind of wind, for 40 years. Quietly, systematically, building something real in a way that required no audiency. I made an offer on the property. The divorce proceedings, meanwhile, were not going as Connor had anticipated. Hartley was, as always, precise and entirely without sentimentality. She had retained a forensic accountant to document every social and professional contribution I had made to Whitfield Capital's client base over the course of the marriage. The Leroy introduction alone, traceable to a dinner I had organized in 2017, had generated, by conservative estimate, millions in management fees over 6 years. This was not grounds to claim his company, but it was grounds to substantially revise the conversation about equalization. Connor's lawyers, I was told, were surprised. The word surprised came back to me through Hartley, with a particular flatness that suggested it was an understatement. His first counteroffer came in December. It was significantly higher than $240,000. I declined it. His second counteroffer came in January. I declined that one too. It wasn't about the money, at that point. I had $31 million in real estate, and a furnished apartment on the Danforth, and more peace of mind than I'd had in years. It was about something else, about the fact that he had stood in our hallway and looked at me on the floor with impatience, like I was a problem to be efficiently resolved, and I needed him to understand exactly how wrong he had been about the scale of what he was looking at. Hartley said, at one of our meetings, "You know you could end this tomorrow." "I know," I said, "but you won't, not yet." She nodded slowly. She is a woman who has seen a great many things in 25 years of family law, and she has the particular quality of understanding something without needing it explained. What ended it, in the end, was February. Connor had, since November, been trying to rebuild his AUM through new business development. He had hired a rainmaker, someone from a competitor firm with a good track record, and they had been working through a list of prospects. One of those prospects was a family in Calgary I happened to know. The Brennans, second-generation oil and gas money cautiously expanding into diversified assets. The Brennans had a daughter who had been in my graduate seminar at McMaster 12 years ago. We'd stayed loosely in touch, the kind of intermittent connection that social media makes possible. A comment here, a message at Christmas. When she saw that Whitfield Capital was reaching out to her family, she messaged me. "Is this your husband's firm?" she wrote. "Former husband," I replied. "Ah," she wrote back. "That explains the timing." She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. The Brennans passed on the meeting. I'm not going to pretend I engineered any of this. What I had done for 14 years was invest in relationships the way my father had invested in industrial property, quietly, consistently, with no expectation of immediate return, and with the understanding that the value would compound over time. That's not a revenge strategy. That's just what it looks like when you've actually been paying attention. The final settlement was reached in March. I'm not going to disclose the number. What I will say is that Hartley looked at it and said with her particular flatness, "This is appropriate." Coming from Hartley, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Connor's company survived the AUM losses, restructured, brought in new capital from institutional sources. He is still in the industry. Sable is still in his life. As far as I know, I don't follow it closely. He has not spoken to me since the settlement was signed. Sable, for her part, was served a civil notice in March related to some text messages she had sent to a member of the Okafor Bryant family attempting to solicit a direct introduction to Connor after the withdrawal. The family found the approach inappropriate and referred it to their lawyers. I had nothing to do with that particular development. I heard about it the way you hear about most things, through someone who thought I should know. I can't say I was devastated by the news. The Dartmouth property closed in April. Gerald drove me by it on a Tuesday morning. A long, low warehouse near the water, nothing beautiful about it, just solid and functional and real. A tenant was already lined up. A regional logistics company that needed the space for a distribution hub. My father would have, he said that about buildings he liked. Good bones meant a thing had been built to last, built to endure whatever the surface looked like from the outside. I stood in the parking lot of that warehouse in Dartmouth with the harbor wind in my face and thought, yes, good bones. In May, I accepted an adjunct position at Dalhousie, teaching one seminar a semester in the business school, not because I needed the income. Because I had spent 14 years being someone's background, and I had things to say that deserved a room. On the first day, I walked into a seminar of 22 graduate students, and I set my bag on the table and I said, "I'm Professor Ashford. We're going to talk about how value is created, how it's attributed, and what happens when those two things don't match." A student in the second row, young, serious looking, the kind who keeps a notebook for actual notes and not just appearances, looked up and said, "Is there a textbook?" "There is," I said. "But the most important things in this course won't be in it." I meant it. I still do. My sister came to visit in June. We walked the waterfront, ate lobster rolls from a place near the ferry terminal, sat on a bench and watched the boats. She asked how I was feeling, not about the divorce, not about the settlement, but about the life. "I feel like myself," I said. And then, because it was true and because she deserved the full version, I think I forgot for a while what that felt like. She didn't say anything. She just put her arm through mine, the way she used to when we were small. We sat there a long time. The light on the water was the particular gold of a Halifax evening in early summer, and the ferries moved back and forth across the harbor, steady and unhurried, the way things move when they know exactly where they're going. I was not the woman who had hit the floor of that Oakville hallway anymore. Maybe I never really had been. Maybe that was always just the surface. The part that looked like the story, while underneath, in the dark, in the quiet, the actual value had been accumulating all along. Like property, like the right kind of patience, like everything my father had understood and never needed to announce. Some things don't need to be said loudly to be true.